Thank you, Carolyn. And I cannot tell you how excited I am to be here with the You Got This audience. I know that this is kind of weird because we normally are together and we can all mingle. And due to the current state of events in the world, that's not possible. But one thing that will always be true is my love for working in technology. Like Carolyn said, I've worked in technology for 20 plus years, and there's just something awesome about building software. And one thing that's really cool about building software is that things always change. There's always some framework or some new API or some way to even test code that helps us stay on our toes and we have to always grow and develop. But one change that I think we can also be a part of is making the software industry a more inclusive and diverse industry. But not only that, I want to make the world more inclusive and diverse. And because I've given this talk so many times, and it is an inclusion and diversity talk, I have conversations with business leaders, and they often ask me questions like, well, how can we change our policies to be more inclusive? Or what do we need to do to be more inclusive? And those questions are often well intentioned, but they're not the right questions. Those aren't the right things to be thinking about, because I'm here to tell you today that inclusion is coming. Inclusion is coming. So the right question is, how do we make sure we're prepared for inclusion? Many of you have seen protests around the world in recent days, and I think most people are waking up to the reality that the world is changing in fundamental ways. And companies are really at the crossroads of inclusion. So again, inclusion is coming, but vulnerable groups like people of color and women and LGBTQ people and other marginalized groups, we've done this for a long time. We've always had to balance protecting ourselves while also pursuing our dreams. Even though we are doing this in companies that often don't look like us and often don't represent our best interest. And so marginalized groups, we're using our power, and it's a power that is really motivated by new technology like social media. We're using our power to push into these companies, despite the fact that often they don't represent us. And we're seeing companies brought to the carpet for that lack of representation, even today, when companies are finding that having really homogenous leadership and homogenous boards blinds them to the reality of what's happening in the world. And how can you truly serve your customers if your products are not made by people who look like them? But you know what? This is not a new problem. Several years ago, there was a television show that had a really popular fan base, and an actor on the show, he had a dilemma. This actor, who was really the biggest star on the show, he found out that one of the female actresses was not being paid as much as the male actors. So when he learned about this, he went to the studio and he demanded equal pay for this actress. And because he was one of the biggest stars of the show, he was successful. The actress got the pay that she deserved. The show was Star Trek. The actor was Leonard Nimoy, who, of course, played Spock. And the actress was Nichelle Nichols, who played Uhura. That's right, Leonard Nimoy was down with equal pay for equal work way before it was cool. Nimoy let Nichols his privilege, his gender privilege as a male actor, but also his influence privilege with the fans. By lending his privilege, he furthered her position as an actress by giving her access to better pay. Now, you may be thinking, what does this have to do with the You Got This conference? What does this have to do with working in the software industry? Well, we're all going through a shift where vulnerable groups, like I said before, are using our power to advance change. And we're not waiting for allies. And software companies all over the world are going to have to navigate this incoming wave of inclusion. And also, the dangers of a non-inclusive software industry are more apparent than ever right? We're building artificial intelligence that's going to be more and more powerful and can be possibly used to be weaponized against countries, used to change elections. Having a diverse workforce with the benefit of different perspectives will be critical to managing the ever-growing power of software. Now, I believe that Leonard Nimoy provided a model for how we can address this problem. Notice that Nimoy didn't wait for the studio to create a diversity program or a fair pay salary program. No, Nimoy acted based on his belief in what was right. He lent his privilege to a fellow artist to help her participate in the financial privileges that he had simply because of his gender privilege. You know what? I think that there are a lot of Leonard Nimoys watching me right now. And I think that there are other ways to lend privilege to create a more diverse and a more inclusive global industry. And I think that Leonard Nimoy saw way back then what we are beginning to realize today. Diverse opinions and voices are simply good for business. Now, I typically have a few slides for the data nerds out there who like to hear research and white papers, but I'm just going to put this here. The World Economic Forum has just stated what we've known for a long time, and that is just the business case for diversity in business is overwhelming. There's really no debate. Diversity and inclusion are good for business. If you unlock this power, your company will do better. And I think that if you don't believe that, you can just Google it yourself. And I think that if you're still not convinced, then I really don't think there's anything I can do to prove otherwise. Now, I've been using the terms diversity and inclusion interchangeably, but we need to distinguish those definitions. Diversity and inclusion are linked, but they are not the same. So let me talk about diversity, right? So let's say you're throwing a party. Diversity is sending invitations. You may include your college friends, maybe a few people from even high school, maybe a few people from work. You know, it's really easy. You're just inviting people to your party. Inclusion goes further than diversity. Inclusion means that the people who drove a lot farther to get there, you're really nice to those people. It means that if there are people who don't drink alcohol, then you provide non-alcoholic beverages for them to consume. Inclusion requires empathy. Diversity, you just need a stamp. And while software companies are trying to help our industry become inclusive, while they're trying to ride this current wave of openness and intent on really solving a lot of the injustices that have formed our society, particularly in the United States, but I know over the world, you know, companies have been trying to lead here, but I think we can't rely on them. It's far too easy for companies to play the HR and the marketing games and try to run the numbers and really not do any action, not affect any change. I really believe that if we're going to make technology a more inclusive and diverse industry, it's going to take a grassroots movement. We're going to have to mobilize a lot of Leonard Nimoys throughout our industry. Now, the cool thing about working in software is that most of us know about open source software. And if you know open source software, then you really already understand grassroots movements. One of the first books on open source software was written by Eric S. Raymond, called The Cathedral and the Bazaar. And it was written because Raymond had just experienced the miracle of Linux. Now, most of you are way too young to remember how Linux was just really controversial. It was this wild project where everyone could take this complicated kernel and do the work of making it into an actually functioning operating system. And it worked. And so Raymond began to take the principles of open source software that he learned from seeing Linux, and he applied it to his own projects. And he began to distill the lessons from those projects into this book. Now, Raymond linked closed source software development done by companies at the time like Microsoft and Apple to a cathedral where there's centralized command and control. But then he contrasted that with open source software where power was distributed evenly among multiple contributors. And he called the open source movement this bazaar, right? This loud, babbling, boisterous bazaar where everyone shared power. And spoiler alert, the open source model produced better results. Now, the lesson that most people take from the cathedral and the bazaar is this one, and that is given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. And if you actually read the book, you see this more defined version of that. And I'm just going to read this. But given a large enough beta tester and co-developer base, almost every problem will be characterized quickly and the fix obvious to someone. Now, this is written in kind of decades old terminology. And I think Eric S. Raymond may not agree with me, but he's really making a statement about inclusion. What he's saying is that as the size of the people working on software grows, our ability to solve problems also grows. And what's innovation other than the ability to solve problems? And I really think that if we want software development to be this big tent, if we want it to be this babbling, boisterous bazaar of people who are involved in building software and they're dedicated to making it better, then there's really no problem we can't solve. And that's the promise of inclusion. But the sad reality is that just like our repositories are protected by passwords and by permissions, often our companies are protected by privilege. And there are voices that we keep out of this bazaar, and we don't make space for them to take part in our projects and in our companies. There are certain groups that have a really hard time lending their voices to this bazaar because they lack privilege. And this is really tragic because no matter what problem you have within your company, within your source code, within your deployment process, there's someone out there who can fix it. But all too often, they are denied entry into your company. Now, to understand how this works and what we can all do to make things better, we have to understand privilege. But before we do that, it's really important that we understand what privilege is not. Privilege doesn't mean that you've had it easy. It doesn't mean that you haven't worked hard. In fact, just to use an example and a metaphor, let's say you're riding your bike up a hill, right? You're pedaling hard. Maybe it's hot. You're sweating. You're getting a cramp in your right leg. You know, you're working hard trying to get up that hill. But there are other people trying to get up that same hill, but they have obstacles that you can't even see, obstacles that you're not even aware of. And your privilege not only allows you to not worry about those obstacles, it also gives you benefits. The benefit of not being pulled over by a police officer and wondering if the color of your skin will make this the last drive that you'll ever make. The benefit of being seen at a bar with someone you love and being seen by a coworker and wondering if your fellow colleagues will think less of you. Or the benefit of not wondering if your hearing aid malfunctions and then someone sees you as possibly a risk to the DevOps team. Or the benefit of not having to change your clothes multiple times in the morning before you go into work when we used to be able to go into work. But wondering that, well, is this outfit going to have my colleagues think differently of me simply because of how I'm dressed? And really that last example shows how women in technology often have to hire to fill two roles. There's the role that they were hired for. Maybe it's to be a developer or an architect or a tester. But then there's the other role, the role of fighting all the stereotypes, the horrible stereotypes that people have about women. And that second role, it's exhausting. And why don't we just empower women to just do the work that they can do so well without the burden of sexism and misogyny? Well, I think that lending privilege can help do this. So now that we know what privilege is, let's get a good definition of privilege. Privilege is simply access to benefits based on traits that you possess. Those benefits could be the benefit of working or living in a safe neighborhood, going to a great school, getting a great job, getting promoted, getting access to wealth. But now there's one problem that most people have with understanding privilege, and that's the fact that we tend to notice people who have more privilege than we do, but we don't notice when we have more privilege than others do. And I call this phenomena the airplane effect. Now, most of you have flown on an airplane before, and we've all gotten onto the plane. And let's say that our assigned seat is in aisle 42. And so we're walking through business class, right? Aisles 1, 2, 3, and you see all these people in these big, comfortable chairs, and they have all this leg room. And then while you're walking by, you hear the flight attendant offer them nice adult beverages. And, you just don't like those people because, man, they're just at the front of the plane and they get all these benefits of being in that high class of service. And so, but, you're all the way back in the slum of row 42. So you're sitting in row 42 and you're beginning to question your life decisions as you peer ahead into business class. But you know what? There are people behind you who have worse seats than you do. They have worse leg room than you do. Those are the folks that when the snack cart gets to them, all the good stuff has already been taken. And they're also sitting next to the bathrooms that really get cleaned maybe once every 100 flights. So they have a much worse experience than you do. And you know what? That's how privilege works. Often you see how good other people have it, but you don't even notice the people who will love to have the position that you take for granted. And I give this talk because I really want to change that. Let's realize our privileges so that we can all get access to a seat at the table. Now, there are two categories of privilege. There's your birth privilege, and that's what the two people who made you gave you. That's your gender, your base level of physical capability, and really most of the features that we use to discriminate against. But then there are what I call your selected privileges. And those are things that you gain as you grow. That might be your religion or your education or your chosen career. These are also the things that if you have access to a trust fund, it's really a lot easier to make the journey through selected privileges easier to navigate for those people who have access to wealth like that. Now, your birth privileges and your selected privileges combine to what I call your portfolio of privileges. Now, I want everyone to look at the slide and then pick a privilege that you have. And some of you probably have all of these, but I think everyone has at least one. So I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to just look and think, what privilege up there really links with me? Now, once you've done that, think about what your career in software, what your career in technology would have been without that privilege. What if you had to start your career without your gender privilege or your racial privilege or the privilege of going to an elite university? At least the elite colleges in the United States are places like Stanford or MIT. Or what if you did not even have the privilege of being able to see or walk around? What would your journey through technology be without those privileges? But think about that. There are so many people in technology who don't have those privileges. Many of them work right next to you at your company, and they have to navigate a world where they are less privileged, and they have to do that navigation at a significant disadvantage. I really think that you can remove a lot of these disadvantages by lending your privilege. Now, I'm going to illustrate 3 types of privilege lending. I'm going to use the example of 3 women. Now, these are real women, but I'm going to give them made up names. Let's say that their names are B on the left, L in the middle, and M on the right. And so for each illustration of privilege, I'm going to define it. I'm going to give an example that I hope everyone can understand how it works. But then I'm going to help you understand how you at your company and even just in your personal life can lend your privilege. So the first type of privilege is what I call credibility lending. And that's providing visibility to someone without privilege. That's what credibility lending is. You're providing visibility to people who lack privilege. Now, I have the fortune of knowing many people in the LGBTQ community, and they share with me how they often feel restricted in tech because we are a heteronormative industry. But I think that by lending privilege, we can really empower all the wonderful people who want to work in this industry to fully bring their value to the work that we do. Here's an example. Several years ago, Stephen Colbert had a show that a lot of people watched, and he's going on to have his own nighttime show. But this show was very popular, and so he invited DeRay McKesson, a very popular and well-known Black activist, to his show. But if you notice, DeRay is in the host chair, right? Colbert switched seats with DeRay, and he gave DeRay the power of his platform. He raised DeRay's profile to give him a higher ability to be visible in the work that he was doing. That's how credibility lending works. So how can you lend credibility in your company? Well, here's B. And you know what? B was the person who really created that killer feature in your next release. And she did it in like 3 sprints, and people thought it was going to take 8 sprints, and everyone was amazed that she was able to get that feature done. But you know what? No one on the executive team even knows her name. In fact, some people think that because she works late at night so much that she's part of the cleaning crew, because that's the only time when people like her show up at work. And so what you can do is, if you have those regular meetings with the executive teams, or if you have those regular interactions, why not the next time you have a presentation to give to that team, bring B along, give her a few slides, maybe even give her the whole presentation, give her a chance to let her light shine, give her an opportunity to show the value she's bringing to the company, to the people who have power at your company. Also, a lot of companies have these awards that you can nominate people for, and then those people get some kind of prize. Well, why not nominate B for the great work that she's already doing? All right, that's credibility lending. All right, access lending is the next type of privilege lending, and that's providing entry for someone without privilege. And I've had the benefit of talking with many women and candidly talking with them about their careers in tech. And often women feel that because they lack gender privilege, that they are held back in tech. And this doubt that comes from being held back causes them to limit what they do. And that's horrible because, again, study after study has shown that if we get more closer to parity, 50-50 men and women, or those who identify as men and women in tech, then we get better results. We just get better when we are equal in the types of genders that we allow to work at our companies, especially when we allow those people to lead. And I really think that access lending can be a way for us to unlock that power. Now, here's the example. In 2018, Octavia Spencer, the lady on the left, who is like an Academy Award level actress, she was starting to shoot a movie. But when she was offered the pay for this film, she was given a very low offer. And this is someone who's been highly decorated as an actress for several years. Well, the lady on the right is named Jessica Chastain, and Jessica had worked with Octavia on a previous film. And Jessica Chastain, when she heard the lowball offer that Octavia was given for this role, she pledged to Octavia, "You're going to get paid what I'm going to get paid." So Jessica went to the studio executives and she negotiated better pay for Octavia and allowed Octavia to get the same pay that she was getting. And that's how access lending works. You bring people into rooms that are normally close to them to make sure that they are treated as well as you expect to be treated. Now, how can you lend access at your company? Well, when your company decides who goes to conferences, either virtual ones like this, or when we can have in-person conferences, why not send someone who doesn't have your privilege? I mean, here's Elle, right? She spent the last few weeks helping your entire team transition to a new container strategy. Why not send someone like Elle to DockerCon? I mean, you go to 5 conferences a year, and can you even spell Kubernetes? Why not allow Elle to go to a conference that will allow her to feel like she's a respected part of this industry, not just within your company, but within her chosen realm of specialization? And then I can promise you that she will enrich whatever event you send her to by presenting her own diverse perspectives. All right, the last example is what I call expertise lending, and that's providing a voice to people without privilege. Now, I'm a Black technologist, and like other Black people in tech, I often feel that we don't have a voice in tech companies because we lack the racial privilege that a lot of tech leaders possess. We don't see ourselves on tech magazine covers or being interviewed on CNN about technology topics. And while things are getting better, we often don't see ourselves in large numbers or even representative numbers at tech companies, especially among leadership. Well, I think that expertise lending can help fix this. All right, here's the example. A few years ago, First Lady Michelle Obama was at South by Southwest, a very popular tech conference in Austin, and she gave a keynote, and she really beautifully described how expertise lending can work. She said that if you have a voice at the table, ask, is there diversity around the table? Are there voices and opinions that don't sound like yours? And you know what? We really need to go further than just talking about those missing voices. We need to add those missing voices to the conversation. Now, how can you lend expertise? Well, let's consider M here. So, your boss brings you that project, and it's one of those plus projects that will look great on your resume. And then when it's time to hand out promotions, this is the promotion making project everyone wants to work on. Well, why not give M someone who everyone on the team loves working with? Why not give M, who's always helping to answer questions in Slack about the technology stack you're using or the way things work? Why not give M the opportunity to lead that project? She's never led a project before, and she writes the cleanest code in your company. By giving her the opportunity to operate at the next level, you improve her odds of not only staying at your company, but advancing to help lead it. So those are 3 examples of lending privilege, and it's really quite easy. In fact, I'm sure that you've been thinking of your own examples. And I want to be clear that lending privilege isn't a silver bullet. It's not like you do it once or twice and it's done. It's going to take effort. And because you probably haven't done it very much, you're probably not going to be very good at it at first. But you got to keep going. You have to keep trying it. And I think that as you do it, you'll get better. And you realize that lending privilege doesn't mean that you lose anything. You're just sharing the benefits with others that you already have. And by doing that, you're making our industry, the technology industry, truly a meritocracy where all talents are welcomed, no matter how they're packaged. Now, I know that you probably, like me, you want to leave your mark on the software industry, right? You want to have your name on those commits and on pull requests. You want to be known for that feature that you created. You might even want to be known for that piece of open source code that you wrote. And I understand that need to have an impact. But you know what? The software we build will one day be obsolete. I started my career in the late 1990s, and the code that I wrote back then, no one uses right now. There will be a day that no matter how proud you are of the software that you've built, one day it's going to have 0 users. But the impact that we can have on our industry by making it more inclusive will long outlast whatever code we're working on today. I know the people who lent me privilege in my early career, that's far outlasted the code that we wrote way back then. So if you really want to if you really want to leave a legacy in software, then I think that lending privilege can be a powerful way to do that. And in fact, this is a legacy that is deeply rooted in the history of the United States. I know this conference is usually in the UK and it has a global audience, but because a lot happening in the United States is kind of in the news right now, I'm going to stick with the example of what's happening in my country and really what's happened in my country. I spoke at a conference a few years ago where Common, who's a very popular rapper, I hope most of you know who Common is. That might be my black privilege that's letting me know who Common is, but he's an amazing artist and I love lots of his songs. But one song that I really love is called Glory. And he co-wrote it with John Legend from a movie called Selma about the civil rights movement in the United States. And the chorus goes like this: one day when the glory comes, it will be ours. It will be ours. And that verse reminds me of exactly why inclusion and diversity work is so important. I read the Constitution recently because I was just thinking about it. And our Constitution just has so many different parts. We have Article 1, which describes Congress, and Article 2, which describes the executive branch, and Article 3 describes the Supreme Court. But really, the amendments are really, that's my jam. And I realized by going through the amendments that the founding fathers had built a pull request system into the Constitution. And it's a messy process, only been tried 27 times, but you can suggest changes, have them reviewed, and then have them merged into production. And the 13th Amendment was the one that made owning slaves illegal, right? Not just owning Black people, but slavery was made illegal everywhere in the United States based on the 13th Amendment. So I'm sure that my ancestors who were brought here as slaves celebrated the 13th Amendment, but really everyone in America should have celebrated because they now lived in a country where everyone was truly free. The 17th Amendment gave women the right to vote, and I'm sure women celebrated, but everyone in America should have celebrated because they now lived in a country where your gender was not held against you at the ballot box. And then leaving the amendments, the US Supreme Court a few years ago defined same-sex marriage as just marriage. And while my LGBTQ friends celebrated, we all could have celebrated because we now live in a country that didn't place any limits on love. You know, this country has tried several times to solve its own peculiar problems and the long injustices done to minorities, women, LGBTQ people, and all the other marginalized groups. But I think that lending privilege can be a very powerful way for us who work in software to solve our own peculiar problems. Lending privilege isn't whites versus Blacks, gays versus straights, men versus women. It's everyone against racism, homophobia, and sexism. And we will win. We will win. One day, when the glory comes, it will be ours. It will be ours. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your attention. And now I'm going to turn it over to Q&A.
Great. Thank you so much. Really wonderful. The chat is buzzing. I'm sure you probably heard. And yeah, really wonderful, really actionable talk. I especially loved what you said about how lending privilege doesn't take anything away from you, because I think so many times our careers are seen as like competition, and it's really important to emphasize that. So thanks. But
Absolutely.
I'll jump into the attendee questions so I don't just go on a whole diatribe about this. But all right, so the first question is there a blog or video or anything that could be shared with the world? I'm guessing besides this talk recording. And do you have any materials that you find inspiring or educational that could be shared as well?
Absolutely. So this was recently posted. It's called the Anti-Racist Resource Guide. I'll tweet this out if you follow me on Twitter. I'm really easy to find on Twitter, just add ANJUAN. But the Anti-Racist Resource Guide was created by Victoria Alexander, who has made her life's mission and study, which is solving inequality, especially based on race. And so that is something that I really highly recommend. It's not based on lending privilege, obviously, but just the ideas that in my talk are very much supported by that document. So I highly recommend that folks check that out.
Awesome. We will look out for that on your Twitter then. So the next question is, should I ask for permission before lending my privilege? Should I actively be mentioning to them that I'd like to help them? Some people might be offended since they might think that we're looking down on them.
You know, it's really interesting because you really shouldn't kind of burst in someone's office or pop on a Zoom call and say, I'm here to lend my privilege. In fact, when I think about when people have lent me privilege in the past, it's very, very much subconscious. Not subconscious, but it was actually done in a very subtle way, right? It's only in hindsight that I realized that's what they were doing. So what I recommend doing is that, find people who don't look like you. And then if you use Twitter, it's really easy. So let's say that you are a React developer, right? You write JavaScript using the React framework. And most of the people who you probably follow in React probably look like you. Find people who don't look like you, don't share your race, your gender, and any other measure. And then slowly by doing so, and then silently just follow them, you'll find that they're really just like you, and that all these differences that we have are really made up. And then by doing that, you'll find how you can help them, because often as a underrepresented person or a member of an underrepresented group, I need the same help that you probably need it, right? And so you'll find ways that you can naturally engage. So I would say that once you learn that, either through Twitter or in person, you'll find ways to help. And you don't have to call it, I'm lending you my privilege. You can just be a good human. And I think that's probably the best way to proceed.
Absolutely. That makes total sense. So, next question says, as someone that feels that they're part of the underprivileged ones, I feel like I would be begging for someone to lend their privilege to me and I must swallow my pride. How can I view that differently?
Yeah. A couple of things. How are we doing on time? I know that I'm the last talk. How much time do we have roughly?
We can keep going a little longer.
Okay.
So, yeah,
Okay.
that's really big, but probably, I don't know. I get to tell you when we end, so we can keep going. Oh, max
Okay.
10 minutes. Perfect.
Got it. Cool. So I'll use that to kind of navigate my answers to questions. So as someone who lacks a lot of privilege, I would say don't let your pride get you down. I think that the current unrest in the United States due to the murder of George Floyd by a police officer while Floyd was unarmed and in custody has shown that there's just a lot of problems that, at least in America, that we have with race, and my friends from around the world have also said, I think people are understanding that there are different levels of privilege, of access, of really power that are given to people based on their race, their gender, etc. So I think the good things that people aren't people are no longer being so blind to that. I would say you don't have to beg anyone to lend them. You don't have to beg people to lend their privilege to you. Just go about doing the work that you're doing and do it loud and do it proud. And I think that you'll find that people will be drawn to that if you're doing something at a high level and doing it excellent, and also just living your own truth, and then being, I think, honest. And then we have these great platforms to how your lack of privilege affects your daily life. I think you'll see people empathize with that. And then I think you'll see people materialize who will be there to support you. So no begging required, just living at a high level that I'm sure you already are.
I love that. That's amazing. So, all right. Next question is, what's the best way to ask someone to lend you their it says permission, but I'm guessing it means to lend you their permission, privilege? I don't know. How can you tell if someone would be willing to help in a situation when you're facing bias?
Yeah, I think that, like I said before, I don't know if you need to ask someone to lend their privilege to you. I think that if you're going about your life and then following your passions and then doing it at a high level, I think that you will find people who will do that. I think the second part of that question, which is to tell someone will be willing to help. Actually, let me change my answer. Actually, I thought about that. I think that the best thing that you can do is, and I'm assuming that you're trying to do something, right? And to give the example at work, let's say you've been trying to work on this project and you haven't gotten any support. I think that it's very important that you understand how humans work. And I think that part of being a professional, and most of us work in companies that have a hierarchy, is understand how networks work. And then as you're doing your work, you want to begin building your network. And the old adage of don't wait until you're thirsty to dig your well, right? Dig your well before you're thirsty. Build your network before you need it. And I think that just by humanizing yourself and then making yourself visible to people who have power, and often privilege does work along levels of power, just by talking about them and knowing their life story, knowing the partner's name and what they care about and what they do for fun, and then sharing that part of you with them, I think you're actually find that you'll find common ground. And then people typically, and this is probably subconsciously, we help people who are like us, even though you may not have the same race or the same gender as that person, by humanizing yourself and then also doing your work at a high level, you'll begin to draw people lending their privilege to you. So I think that's one way to do that. It's kind of a complicated answer, but I hope all that makes sense. Does that make sense, Carolyn?
I think it made sense, but we can always, like, if it didn't make sense to whoever, I don't see the names of whoever asked it, but we can also continue it in the diversity, accessibility, and inclusion channel. We have one last question. Sorry, we have one last question, and it is: how would you recommend opening doors of a workplace where it's heavily biased in the people they've hired, but now have realized the importance to welcome inclusion?
Yeah, this is unfortunately a very common challenge, only because companies are usually built by a group of people who are homogenous in a lot of ways, and then they hire people who are very much like them, right? We tend to hire people who are like us. And I think that a lot of companies, especially in light of current events, are becoming aware that, wow, we really have a leadership group that is the same. And it really shouldn't be surprising that when you have the same people, you get the same answers, you get the same solutions. If you want to have innovation, you probably need to have different faces, different voices, different points of views. And so I think companies are waking up to that. I think that you have to, one, help them understand how they got there, that they probably hired people who they knew. And, we always talk about hiring the best people. And while that's a good idea and companies think that they hire the best people, but you normally hire the people who you know. And you probably don't know all the best people. And so I think helping them understand that. But I think that one concrete thing that I can say in the time that we have is, if you want to have different outcomes in the makeup of your company and the gender mix and the racial mix and all these different ways, you have to change where you look for talent. You probably have to reach out to different organizations, and there's women in engineering groups, there's blacks in technology groups, and then you have to do the work of reaching out to those pools. And I really believe that if you do that, you'll get better results. A big kind of counter argument that people have to when I tell them you really need to diversify your hiring pool is, we don't want to lower the bar. And I don't know why people link hiring more diverse people with lowering the bar. But to give a trite example, let's say you're a single person, you go to the same bar every night to meet someone you're trying to date, just to go to dating. I know it's kind of off, but you go to the same bar every night, but you're not getting the results. Well, go to a different bar, right? That would make sense. That's not lowering the bar. Just go into a different bar and try somewhere else. And sometimes we have to go to a different bar in our hiring to get better results. And I think that people should not equate hiring more people of color and hiring LGBTQ people and hiring women as lowering the bar. No, you're raising the bar because you're getting more inclusion and all the power of diversity into your company.
Great. And then I know I said last question, but there's one more that I think lends really well to what you just said, and especially to what's going on right now. So this will be the last question.
Sure.
Given that tech companies, brands, are now spending time trying to address current events, how do you communicate the difference between actually lending privilege versus doing small statements that just attempt to give the appearance of lending privilege?
And we're seeing a lot of virtue signaling by companies right now. And there's a lot of very temporary shows of support. It's very easy to say Black Lives Matter on Twitter, or to write that phrase on your company's, building. But show the data. Say, this is what our leadership looks like. How many men, how many women, how many straight, how many trans, how many LGBTQ, how many blacks, how many whites, how many Asians. Show your work, and then commit to showing that work on a regular basis and what you're doing to make those numbers change. I think that if you really want to get down to brass tacks, if you really want to show that you're serious, you got to show the work. You have to commit to doing actions to make those numbers truly representative, and to show that you're lending the privilege within your company to the people who really need it the most.
Absolutely. That was a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Anjuan, for taking the time today. Really appreciate it. And I hope we can continue this discussion over the diversity, accessibility, and inclusion channel, because I'm sure there will be a lot more to talk about.
Absolutely. I'll be hopping over there, and so you'll find me there. And obviously, if you want to follow me on Twitter and continue this discussion, happy to engage there as well.